Welcome to Eye on the Illini. This is Mike Kegley. We are here today, and we've got a really cool treat. One of the great things about working with the Illini guys is you get to meet some fantastic and interesting people. Today we have Chris Willis on. He is a historian at NFL Films. Chris, thanks for coming on today.
Oh, no, thanks for having me on, Mike, especially around the 100th anniversary of the Memorial Stadium and Red Grange's greatest game.
Exactly. So we are going to be talking today about the 100th anniversary, which is rapidly coming up. On the day that the game will be played, we will have essentially 100 years and 1 day of difference from Red Grange scoring 6 touchdowns in an era that 6 touchdowns was unheard of against the defending national champion Michigan Wolverines. And of course, on Saturday, October 19th, Illinois will be playing the defending champion, Michigan Wolverines. So, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about the life of Red Grange, but before we start that, and this is what makes this so cool, is Chris will be talking at a symposium called Ghost Stories at Memorial Stadium, Red Grange and the Game of the Century. Now, you want to write this down because in the Memorial Stadium 77 Club on Thursday, October 17th at 6:30 p.m., there will be a symposium on Red Grange and his impact to football, and that will lead up to the 100th anniversary of his legendary performance. And Chris will actually be there as a special guest. He's one of the top football historians in the nation and the head archivist and producer at NFL Films. He will talk a little bit about what's going on. And folks, this event is free and open to the public. If there is ever a time you want to make the trek over to Memorial Stadium that's not related to a game, this is it. And of course, you're thinking to yourselves, well, Chris knows a lot about the NFL, but people don't understand how important Red Grange was to the early success of the National Football League. And if you want more information, you can check out Chris's book, Red Grange, The Life and Legacy of the NFL's First Superstar. Now, that's available on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle. It is a fantastic way to get ready for this 100th anniversary is to go over to the symposium on Thursday night, listen to Chris and the people who are there. You could prepare by reading the book and listening to the book and being ready to go. I think it's a great combination. Chris, you've got the total access to the history of the NFL. How did you decide to take a look at Red Grange as opposed to all the numerous players you could have written a book on?
Yeah, I started well over 20 plus years ago, really. Red's one of my favorite players, although he played in the 20s and 30s, being a fan of pro football and NFL, obviously Red is a key figure in that. And, so it's just doing a lot of research over the last 20 years. And then around 2017, the NFL was getting ready to celebrate its 100th season. In 2019, I was like, well, I've done all this research. I have collected all this stuff, anything I could find. And I was like, well, this is a perfect opportunity to do a full scale biography, which really hadn't been done before. So I just dug into it. My publisher loved the idea with the anniversary coming up with the 100th season. So that's what got me started on it. And then, like I said, I couldn't really stop doing the research, but I had to write it. And it came out in 2019, and it's still like I said, it's, something I'm proud of and to sort of preserve his legacy. So that's what got me started. And then since 2019, like I said, little things like this, like an anniversary or just to keep his legacy going, because not just the NFL. I mean, obviously you're tied into, University of Illinois. He has, I mean, it's been 100 years since he's really played. He's probably still the greatest player to come out of Illinois.
Yeah.
I mean, people might say Dick Buckus, but he's probably won 1A still after 100 years. And same thing with the NFL. He has an impact even after 100 seasons. Um, So it's always good to go back, relive what he did because we're all fans of the game. We're all fans of Illinois, fans of, pro football, NFL. Why? Well, he's the one that sort of helped elevate it to, this type of status where Saturday, Sunday, Monday, there's a game on every day pretty much, and and people enjoy it. So
Yeah, one of the things that I found as a guy who is a sucker for history, and I will listen to history podcasts, whether it's ancient Egyptians, sports, you name it. And I was going down through reading some history, and the 1920s, people don't realize, but there were three megastars when it came to athletics in the United States. Of course, everybody knows Babe Ruth. I mean, Babe Ruth, Babe Ruth. And Jack Dempsey, very famous. I did not realize that Red Grange stood equally, if not maybe even for a moment, he might have had the highest peak of any of them. Can you talk about what you discovered about him and what he meant both to the NFL and just across the country at that time?
yeah, this was, I mean, the anniversary, coming up, in a couple weeks, that was his coming out party. The 6 touchdowns against Michigan. He's not only plastered on the front page of sports pages, he's on the front page of the newspapers and magazines and newsreels. So this is right at the height of mass market media. Like we're in a big media market, boom right now in a different way. But when he was coming up, newspapers were the things that sold celebrities and radio, magazines, newsreels, and things like that. And he, especially in 24, 25, and 26, you could say maybe outside of Babe Ruth, but even then, he might have had as many front page headlines and sports page headlines than any other athlete or celebrity in the country. And he played football. He wasn't, like he said, especially pro football was not big at the time. It was college football was king, and they got all the publicity and the media attention. So he was right there. Jack Dempsey, Babe Ruth. You can even throw in Bobby Jones in golf. Like he was one of those pillars of the golden age of sport, which was the 20s when mass media sort of was at its height. You know, uh, you can make an argument. Yeah, he'd probably be more just as popular as Babe Ruth, more popular than the president of the United States. He was, way ahead of, Calvin Coolidge or whatever. Like
Yeah.
he was there as an icon, and he still, like I said, 100 years later, we're still talking about him.
When you looked into doing the biography, what type of research did you do? How do you start that research and what's the process that you used?
Yeah, that's like I mentioned before, it started almost 20 years ago. Like I was, huge Grange fan, so I would try to find anything I could, whether it's books, magazines, programs, tickets, newspaper, anything like that. So I had a good base, and then when when I chose to write a full scale biography, then I went even deeper. Look at his family. He didn't have any children, but so then you go to secondary family members. Then you try to find the primary sources, whether it's oral histories. The great thing about Red is he stayed visible throughout his life, pretty much. He went into sports broadcasting, which he was a pioneer in that. So he did tons of interviews. So oral history, his words, his thoughts of what whatever part of his life he was going through, you try to find that. And then, try to find interviews. A little unfortunate that there was not too many people that played with him or against him. I was able to interview a couple of his teammates, in 1999, 2000, like George Musso and Uki Miller, uh, who were still alive then. So
Yep.
they give me a little bit more input. So you just try to find those avenues, especially oral history, articles, the original articles from newspapers. Yeah, I spent many days on newspaper.com and even go through microfilm at that, during that time. So you just trying to find those primary sources that give you a little more insight. about who he was and, as a player, as a man. Like I said, his post career, which was broadcasting, and retirement in Florida and stuff like that. So you just try to find everything, and like I said, there's certain things I find now, and I'm like, oh man, I wish I had that maybe. Oh, when I was writing the book, I could have added maybe that little detail, but eventually you have to write it. You can't. I could spend the rest of my life still doing research because he's just a fascinating person who lived a fascinating life.
So when you talk about a fascinating person who lived a fascinating life, what were some of the things that stand out to you? Because you deal with fascinating people like an everyday event when you're dealing with the whole history of the NFL. What jumped out at you about Red Grange that captured your imagination?
Yeah. I think the thing, and I wrote about it a little bit in the introduction, and once I started digging a little bit deeper, and it just he to me is the blueprint of what the modern athlete does today. You know, he did it in 1925. He did it pretty much 100 years ago when the league was nothing. Coming out of college, but he was an All American, Illinois, you know, three-time All American, set records and everything. Then he hired an agent. He signed to go pro, after his last game. He did endorsements. He actually did a few Hollywood movies and serials, uh, then he had an all pro career, won 2 championships with the Bears, was a college football Hall of Famer, pro football Hall of Famer. That's kind of what the modern athlete wants to do. He plays college, he goes pro, signs endorsements, wants to do these things, wants to win championships. And then his post career is just as interesting and accomplished. He goes into radio, then TV when TV started booming in the 50s. He broadcast Bears games, national games, Lindsey Nelson with the college football game of the week. He becomes a spokesperson for just football in general, and he becomes uh, you know, like an icon. Like that's what Peyton Manning's doing. That's what he did in his career. Eventually, he's going to do that. Tom Brady, Jim Brown, like all these players that came after him. He sort of set the blueprint, and he did it like 100 years ago, like way before it became popular. Because I think if you talk to modern athletes, oh yeah, I would like to do all that in my lifetime, and then have a post career like, and a successful post career. And me, oh yeah, I'd like to do that, and then raise a family. Obviously he got married, stuff like that. So married for almost 50 years, and hey, that's the blueprint of what you see today. And he was the first one to do it. So that sort of was the one thing that stood out, like somebody that took a chance in 1925, 26 to to go from college to pro, and he got ridiculed, he got killed. The college football world didn't want him to play pro football. The coaches didn't want him. I mean, Fielding Yost and Stagg and all Pop, they killed Grange in the media, like pro football's not going to last, and all that stuff. And he did it, because that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to take advantage of his name because he knew he only had a few years of playing pro ball, and he did it. And like I said, now everybody that we sort of applaud, the guy that comes out of college, goes pro, and then builds a career afterwards, like a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady.
When you look at this, and I know this is a huge extrapolation, what do you think would have happened to the NFL if he hadn't been there? Because I think, and maybe you can also talk about this a little bit, but he had a unbelievable effect on the NFL by having a star of his magnitude show up. So maybe you can talk about like the effect he had on the NFL and what might have happened if he hadn't come.
Yeah. I mean, there are some quotes that say, "Oh, he saved the NFL." He didn't really save the NFL. Pro football was going to survive, but I think what he did, and why he's so important is he first he made it popular to go play pro football. Up to that point, most of the All Americans didn't bother. They had a name, so they might have went into coaching or private business because they could make more money. They were It wasn't like now where the salaries. So not only did he make it popular, but he also made it mainstream across the country. Like up until him signing, a lot of the teams were still in small towns. the National Football League wasn't national at all. The West Coast didn't have really too many pro teams. South didn't have any really pro teams. So when he turned pro, all the major sports writers followed him on this tour, and they went down south. They went out to Los Angeles and San Francisco and Portland and Seattle. Like, so they followed him and they sort of wrote about pro football and these big crowds that he was. I mean, he got 70,000 in New York, 75,000 in Los Angeles, another 25 to 30,000 San Francisco. Like, and the average crowd was maybe 3 to 4,000 at that time. So not only did he, make the game, I think, popular for players, because Ernie Nevers at Stanford actually played Pro Bowl right after that. George Wilson played pro. So some of those players who normally might like, nah, you know what, I'm going to go into private business or coaching. I'm going to go play pro ball for a couple of years. And so I think that the influx of some more talented players helped the NFL. And then obviously the attention, especially nationally. Now all of a sudden you got cities on, like Los Angeles and, Miami and New Orleans actually knowing, hey, this is pro football. And a guy like Red Grange, who I've been reading about all year, and the Michigan game and the Penn game and all that stuff, now they know that, oh wait, there's this pro league, and like I said, if he doesn't, and then we go back to, if he doesn't maybe join the NFL and he just goes into coaching, it might have took a little bit longer for the NFL to get established. Does New York came in 1925? Does the transition to the big major cities is a slower thing because it's still regional. Like, you're still not getting the Red Granges and the Ernie Nevers coming into pro football in the NFL. Maybe it's a little bit slower, not, takes its time, but the sport was entertaining enough to to sort of find its own way, but it might have took longer for the NFL to establish itself if it wasn't going to get the Red Granges and the Ernie Nevers, and then later with like Don Hudson and
Yep.
Sammy Balt, like that made it easier for those type of players because up to that point there was only a Jim Thorpe here and there, and that was it. But then the NFL saw an influx of super talented players.
So he was getting all the press back in those days. It's a different world because the newspapers were huge. Were there the ability to broadcast radio for some of his games back in those days, or was that even pre-radio coverage of NFL games?
Well, in college, they were broadcast,
Yeah,
mainly local. Like I think it might have been WGN and in Chicago that did some radio for Illinois games. Now the NFL was very hit or miss. The Canton Bulldogs in the 20s weren't broadcasting their games on
right.
radio. So it took, and that's the thing. Once Grange came in, there's a little more attention to the games and what's happening, who's playing, who's these other teams, like the Chicago Bears and the New York Giants who are coming up. Um, but it wasn't a weekly routine, and it was sort of spot hit and miss. And then once the big cities sort of took over, like I said, with the Chicago Bears and New York Giants, Philadelphia Eagles, then the broadcasting came. But by then he was near the end of his pro career. But at his height, the NFL wasn't broadcasting games, all the time or every single game.
It just seems his exposure made all those doors started to open, or at
Mhm.
least were jiggled a little bit. When you talk to his teammates back in the '90s before they passed away, because again, you're looking at a guy who played 100 years ago, what type of feedback did they give you on Red Grange?
Yeah, that was one of the fun conversations or interviews I've done, in my career. George Musso, I was like 90 years old. He's a Hall of Famer. But he was, and the same thing with Uki Miller. He was a center, all pro center with the Bears. Uh, they were just, they were in all of Grange, because when they joined the Bears, Red had been around, 6, 7 years, they were
Yep.
rookies like in 31, 32, 30, at the height, and those championship teams of 32 and 33. But they just said he was like the perfect gentleman. He would give you the shirt off his back, and he was a great teammate. Like, obviously he still had a name, so but he didn't want the attention, like, there might have been fans still coming to the games to watch him play, but he would be, if it took him to be a decoy, which he did. He did a lot of, "Oh, I'll be a decoy," and the play would go the other way, and they would get the touchdown, and Red would be perfectly fine doing that, and he didn't necessarily have to, score the touchdown all the time and things like that. Uh, so so those teammates like Musso and Miller, they were just, you know, totally just, in awe of him, would do anything for him because he would do anything for them. Uh, and like I said, that was pretty consistent, with some of the people I chatted with. I did do interviews with some opponents that he played against, like Glenn Presnell with the Detroit Lions and Harry Newman with the Giants, and they were still saying, "Oh, he was still great," and especially later in his career, where he wasn't the breakaway runner because he had a knee injury. He was the best defensive back in the league. Like, he could cover, anybody, and he won't let anybody get behind him, and wouldn't, and was a sure tackler. Like, they were still, talking about his football IQ, and I think that's why he stayed with the game with the broadcaster. He just loved talking about the game. He loved the X's and O's and stuff like that. He didn't like coaching. He thought there was too much pressure. He's like, you could be good one year and then you could be fired the next. So he's like, I don't predict, because he did do some coaching with the Bears, but he went into broadcast because he could be close to the game. He could talk to the players and coaches and get ready for the game. And he loved radio and TV in the 50s, through the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. So,
You took my next question. I was gonna ask you, when I grew up, you'd see Roy Green might play some both ways, and of course, now you have
mhm,
Travis Hunter in college who's playing both
mhm,
ways. That was the way things went back in those days. Were there a lot of guys who were all pro on both sides of the ball, or was that a relatively unique thing that Red accomplished?
This is the run my own business dream. This is the college is paid for dream. This is the retire early dream. This is Busey, where your dreams and possibilities become moments through trusted guidance and expertise, through lifelong relationships. Because we're here to help you achieve the life you've always envisioned.
Well, I think it was somewhat common because most players played 60 minutes, so if you were an end, you had to play what
Yeah,
would be almost considered tight end and defensive end. Your fullback, you might play fullback and a little bit of linebacker and things like that. But some players had their strengths. Some, like Hudson, it's when he started out, he wasn't a great defense player because they tried to play him at defensive end, but then they moved him to sort of defensive halfback, and he was much better, So, um, I think the thing with Grange was, uh, you know, everybody recognized how good he was. I think as a defender because he had lost some speed. I mean,
yep.
at that time, when you know, he pretty much tore his ACL, so he's playing on a bad knee with no real surgery, no real rehab at the time, and he becomes a quality player, maybe not the breakaway threat that he was at Illinois, that's what made him special. He's going 60, 70, 80 yards on runs. Well, he didn't quite do that in the NFL, but he would have his 30, 40-yard run, but then defensively, he was the best. Like, he was consistently, even like Curly Lambeau said, he was the best defensive back. We could never get behind him, and trick him and things like that. So there obviously was a appreciation for his defensive play, because I saw tons of interviews and quotes about that. So it wasn't just, oh, he was a great offensive player. Like,
Right.
if they're appreciating his defensive play, obviously he was doing something very well.
How was his relationship with George Hallis, who was also a University of Illinois guy? How did they get along?
Yeah, I think at the beginning it was perfect. Like, Hallis was, the Bears were only about what 4 or 5 years old in 1925, but Hallis could see the teams, or especially his team, needed stars, and Red Grange was the biggest star. It's in his backyard. It's at his alma mater, coached by Zupke, who coached Hallis. So his eyes just like, I need Grange. And he did whatever he could to get Grange. So there was an initial, respect and friendship there. Now, after that barnstorming tour, Grange's agent, CC Pyle, got even more greedy, wanted more money. So Grange kind of just let Pyle direct the ship. And obviously they started their own league. So I don't think there was any animosity or, like, oh, hatred or anything like that.
Yep.
I think Hallis kind of treated it as business, so he didn't hold it against Grange that he left and went and started his own league, because uh, and then when after Grange hurt his knee in 1927, he sat out the 1928 season, because he thought he was done. I hurt my knee, and it was really Hallis reaching out to Red saying, "Look, you're still young, you still have a name, I know you can still play," and sort of had faith in Red, and Red said, "Okay, my knee feels a little better, let's do this." So I don't think Hallis reaches out to Red if he didn't care about him, or obviously he wants to get people in the stands and he wants to win
Yep.
games, but he always had a sort of a great friendship with Red, and it continued their entire life after that. Like I said, Red coached for him after he retired. When he went into broadcasting, he would lean on Hallis for and for anything, like if it's just a little information for his broadcast or doing the Bears games, and they quite as much, unless he was visiting Chicago a little bit. But they would exchange letters and phone calls all the time, and then when House passed away in 1983, Red was devastated. There was a couple articles that said his wife Margaret said, "Oh, he can't talk right now. He's," and Red was always great with the media. And then later in that day, they wanted a quote from Red. He ended up calling, all the reporters back and saying, "Okay, now I have time to talk and reflect and stuff." So they always got along. Like I said, they were two Illinois guys that were you could even say best friends, throughout their
Yeah,
life.
and as we went along, he got into to radio and TV. Pete Rozelle seems like he was the guy who really understood the power of television coupled with football. Was Red a guy that Pete Rozelle talked to and worked with, or was that something that was Pete kind of figured all this out by watching Red on TV along with other input to put together this NFL TV monolith, really?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think Pete had, uh, or maybe followed Red, his career a little bit, because when Pete was getting, his feet wet in the 50s, Red was at his height. He's radio, TV, and that type of stuff. So, and and I think Pete, could see the power of a former player, or a player, or somebody with a name. Like, okay, you know, when there's a big game, because Red did championship games, he did the college all-star game at Soldier Field at the beginning of the year, and that if these type of events are going on and becoming more popular, then we need to have people, whether it's on TV, first on radio, then on TV, bring that. So maybe, like you said, when Roone Aldridge brought Monday Night Football to Pete, he's like, "Well, we need a broadcasting group that," and you got to think that first year there was 3 men in the booth, and at that
Right.
time that was not common at all. You just had two. He's like, "Oh no, Monday Night Football is going to have three." And then it became Howard Cosell, and it became Don Meredith, and it became Frank Gifford. And so maybe, Pete looked at that and was like, "Hey, when we have these events, like Monday Night Football and playoff games and Super Bowls, we need the best announced. We need to, bring, and you see the networks now, they're following that. They're looking for the next John Madden. They're looking, they want the Tony Romos and the Tom Brady's of the world, because people might watch just because of, I've heard it from a few people. "Oh no, I don't watch because of the announcers," but some people do. Like, "Oh, I want to see how Tom Brady is. I want to see how Tony Romo is, or I want to see how Troy Aikman. It's like, you put and that's the thing, Peyton Manning and his brother built a whole new broadcast because people wanted to see how Peyton Manning and Eli talk football, and so it's, so Red was at the, sort of dawn of this where ex-players went into the business because that was not common at all when Red did it. It was all just, the Red barbers and the,
Yep.
Vin Scully's of the world that had the voice and the big booming voice and that type of stuff. Um, and Pete probably saw that, and Red was at the beginning of that. Red was pretty much the first former player to do color and play-by-play, first on radio, and had his own radio shows. Like he would do review preview shows on Friday and Saturday, and then the games on Saturday and Sunday. So he did a lot at that time. He was like Kurt Herbstreit, doing everything,
Yep.
and even in the late 30s and 40s and 50s, so.
When you look at Red Grange, the other thing that pops into my mind is he was kind of almost like a rags to riches type of person. What do you think was going on there that made him so adaptable to this, going from one extreme to the other in terms of growing up with next to nothing and then being the model for the
Mhm.
professional athlete of the future?
Yeah, and that's my one regret is not not to be able to ask some of these questions to Red, because you pick some of it up in some of his interviews, but then there's some parts missing. You're like, because the one thing that I mentioned before was like he's the blueprint of the modern athlete. And I think, and I truly believe he thought that way in 1925. I think even before that, when he was the Wheaton Iceman, and he's
Yeah.
really using that to build his body up and his legs for the season. He did mention like, oh, I did, and I would be 2 months ahead of any of the other players because I worked out. Most of the kids were just, goofing around and playing games, going fishing. Well, he's building his legs up, the entire summer, you know, to actually get better, at football. And there was a lot of those type of quotes even in the 20s and 30s, and I felt like his mentality was more of what you would see today, like the guys in college football now, like Ohio State has this uber freshman receiver, Jeremiah Smith,
Yeah.
who's just a freak athlete in there, or like you mentioned, Travis Hunter. Well, I think Red was thinking that way, like, his, like I said, that was his weight room, and then he would run. He would practice throwing with his brother and things like that during the summer, and he would practice, his plays and catching and stuff like that. That back then, not too many, I think, athletes, especially football players, were doing. They would either, so I think that's what made his mind special, and like I said, that translated to his broadcasting because he thought of those things. He thought of off season and you need to do this, and in season you need to do this, and you need to practice this, in order to be good, or work out instead of doing nothing, work on your legs, work on your upper body and stuff. Um, so I think that mentality was there, early. Like he was, to me, like I said, he was a modern athlete, and maybe there's others. There's some of the great, although I don't think Babe Ruth did a lot of, he
He did a
tried
lot
some
of things. I don't know that.
exercising,
Yeah, training was
yeah,
one.
or training in the off season. Sometimes he did because, his health told me, hey, if you don't, you're gonna not be able to play. So, but he did. I was impressed with some of the research of finding how he treated certain things that I would contribute to what a modern athlete would do today.
That's so interesting. Is
Mhm.
there anything that maybe I haven't covered about Red that you want to share with people? Because obviously the research you did was pretty extensive.
Red Grange wasn't just a football player, he was a legend. Discover the untold story of Illini great Red Grange in a new novel by Doug Vilhard called The Golden Age of Red. This captivating book takes you back to the 1920s when a humble young Illinois player transformed into the galloping ghost and electrified the nation. Get your copy of The Golden Age of Red by Doug Vilhard today. Available on Amazon and wherever books are sold.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, he was such a, introvert. It's sometimes a little, strange to when I was doing the research that, he was, I don't think you could say perfect gentleman. He was a gentleman. He didn't brag about himself, especially later in life. He didn't, want the attention, but he was the biggest name, during the Roaring Twenties, with Babe Ruth. He did movies, like, it seemed out of character, but I think he wanted to challenge himself, doing movies. He did vaudeville. He did some stage stuff. Like, that's taking a chance. You can embarrass yourself. You could be bad, and so he just, like I said, he's just such a fascinating individual and led a fascinating life. And then maybe like the last 20 plus 25 years of his life, he just retired in Florida, next to a golf course, and almost being that icon. So, but he surprises me, like, oh wow, he did a stage show for a year, while he's rehab, while he's coming off the knee injury. That takes some guts. And then also being a great football player, that takes some guts. Being a pioneer broadcaster, well, that, like I said, so those things, there's certain things that pop up that he still surprised me. Like, okay, that he accomplished that, and what am I doing with my, so it's that's some of the stuff that sort of popped up that was fascinating.
Yeah, that I mean, it is just amazing. The biggest thing when I look back on this now, and it's easy, 100 years later, but you saw like Newt Rockne took Notre Dame on the road to make them what they are. And I almost wish somebody at University of Illinois had that same understanding, because those 3 years with Red Grange, you
Mhm,
could have played USC, you could have done some things and
mhm,
built the brand, because
mhm,
he was so big that I don't
mhm,
probably people just didn't understand at the time what a giant they were creating culturally.
mhm.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Oh, no, absolutely, and I think Zupke was slightly thinking, because he saw what Notre Dame was doing, and they did play University of Pennsylvania on the East Coast, Red's senior year, but that sort of cemented, because the East Coast was still, oh, you're in the Middle West. You got to beat a East
Right.
Coast team to be great, and he did. So I think he was thinking that. I think the thing that Zub got, he just never had another Red Grain,
Yeah.
So he recruited good, but he would still keep to Illinois. He didn't, recruit, all over the place, and he had solid players, but he didn't come across another, um, and I guess, like I said, with Rockne sort of elevated, him, himself, and I think Rockne put himself out there a little bit more too,
Yeah.
as a self promoter, where Zupke
Yeah.
didn't, for the most piece, kept, Rockne liked the spotlight a little bit more. Yeah. So, but it would have been interesting to see how, like I said, how popular Illinois could have been if they continued on a roll, or, were able to recruit nationally or play nationally a little bit more. So,
Now, for folks who maybe go out and they read your book, and they enjoy it, what else have you written that somebody could go ahead and take a look at as well?
sure. I mean, if you're a Bears fan, I did a biography on Bronco Nagurski, in a similar time period, and he had the world championship wrestling aspect with his NFL career too. And then there's a book I wrote about Joe Carr, who's a little bit of an unknown. He was the uh, NFL president from 1921 to 1939. So the book is about his career and how they sort of built the NFL from the small towns to the big cities, and how he recruited, like Art Rooney with the Steelers, Burke Bell with the Eagles, Mara with the Giants. So it's not only a biography about him, but it's about the growth of how the NFL grew in those first 2 decades. So, so if you like early pro football, there's some titles there that can bring some of that out if you enjoy that.
And finally, what are you working on today at NFL Films? Is there anything on the horizon that people could be looking for or anticipating?
Sure. I think the thing that's coming out this month, now that we're in October, we did a documentary on Wellington Mara, the Giants. If you're in the New York, or the Giants are celebrating their 100th season this year.
Okay.
they started in 1925, 19, so Wellington, his dad Tim was the original owner, but Wellington was there his entire life pretty much. So it's called the Duke because that was his nickname, the Duke. That's why you see the Duke on the NFL football was because of Wellington. So
Okay.
that documentary will be on NFL Network sometime in October. And then we're just, getting ready for the season. We got the London games. We got some of the international games coming up. So if you're a big football fan, you can start at 9:30 on Sunday and watch, 4 straight games, which some of us do.
Uh,
So that'll
yeah,
start this weekend, but you can look forward to some of those things.
yeah. Guilty as charged. I've had Sunday ticket since it started, and for some reason, DirecTV got rid of the 4 screens at
Mhm.
once, and now it's back
Mhm.
with YouTube. And
Yeah.
I just love that because you
Yep.
can have 4 games on, you can watch
Mhm.
one, and then you can swing over to another, and
Yep.
it's
With
it's
with
just
the
the
audio
greatest thing.
switch. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess I just it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I just tell my wife, in late August, I'm like, "Well, football season's starting. See you in February."
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
So,
great.
but I am
Well,
looking forward to being at Illinois, that 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and going to the game and doing the symposium. So I'm looking forward to taking a little bit of an NFL break to check out University of Illinois football. Since
yeah,
we're
and
off to a
folks.
good start too. So
Oh, they've started 4 and
mm,
1, fantastic
yeah.
start for Illinois.
Mm,
And folks, again, just to kind of talk about it, the symposium is as you can kind of see scrolling across the screen. That's on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. at the Memorial Stadium 77 Club. And folks, again, it's free and it's open to the public. I cannot tell you enough that you need to take advantage of that.
mhm,
And I'm going to try my best to be there, but American Airlines has to back me on that as I fly in from Dallas. So we're gonna hope there,
mhm,
and other things going on that weekend. Just so that people understand, there's a rededication ceremony that's in Grange Grove, right outside of the stadium, right there at the statue, on Friday, October 18th at 11 a.m. And they're basically going to be free and open to the public. There's going to be the rededication ceremony. That should be a ton of fun, and they're going to talk a little bit about the many uses of Memorial Stadium over the last 100 years, and also some new historic features around the stadium. And that's pretty cool. And on the 100th anniversary gala is Friday night at 5:30 p.m. and that's actually sold out, and that's going to be inside the Colonnades Club, where they are going to feature some of the greatest players to wear the Illinois uniform, sharing stories and reliving memories of the last 100 years. That will be a spectacular event. And of course, you cannot forget that on Saturday, October 19th, you've got the game. Now that time is still to be determined. I'm hoping it's a 2:30 game and can be on
mhm,
national TV. But of course, Illinois will be out in their uber cool jerseys and
yeah.
helmets that look like 100 years ago. Now,
Mhm,
obviously, we will find that, but there are less than 2,000 tickets remaining for that game. You can go to fightingillini.com and look for that. And I think the final thing, and Chris, you can throw in your 2 cents on this, but on October 18th, 1924, Red Grange put together one of the greatest performances that college football has ever seen. And that was on the Memorial Stadium's dedication game against Michigan that arrived with a 20 game undefeated streak. And he basically tore through that like the proverbial hot knife through butter,
mhm.
and he set the tone with a 95-yard kickoff return of the opening kickoff. And 5 minutes later, he scored his second score of the game, a 67-yard run. And but the opening 12 minutes, he had 4 touchdowns. He finished the game with 6 scores and over 400 yards of total offense.
Mhm.
And just to give you an idea, so with 6 touchdowns, he had 36 points on his own. Michigan had only allowed 32 points in that entire 20 game undefeated streak. So
Mhm.
he did it in one game. He shattered what 20 teams couldn't do. And so that gave him the Galloping Ghost nickname. And that was in an era when you didn't score that many points. So I don't know if you
Mhm.
had any other comments, but it's such an incredible game that people don't really understand what he did.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, it's 100 years and we're still talking about it in awe. Like, okay, did he actually do this? Somebody actually do this? And he did. I think the thing for me, it's going to be special is that stadium is still there. Like, so that Saturday, when the current Wolverines come in, like you could almost visualize Red doing what he did, because the stadium's still there. You got the Grange Rock in one corner of the end zone. So I'm going to soak it up and be like, okay, a little bit maybe before the opening kickoff of this game, I'm going to soak it up and say, this is what Red did. This is what, and he did it in this field. Obviously it's field turf now,
Yes.
but he ran all over, the University of Michigan in that stadium. So I'm going to appreciate that and feel that a little bit before uh, the new guys in their, like you said, in their throwback uniforms really looks really cool. Sort of see if they can duplicate what Red did 100 years ago.
Yeah, it is going to be fantastic. Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate you coming and sharing this story. And again, Red Grange, the life and legacy of the NFL's first superstar. Go to Amazon.com. You just search under Chris Willis, Willis. You can find it and you have the opportunity to grab that. You can buy it now with the one click. It's about as simple as you possibly can make it. If you're interested, I would encourage you to do that and be ready for this game. Thanks, Chris.
That's oh no, thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Hopefully, you had some fun. I know I had a good time with it as well. It was really entertaining to talk to Chris, and I would encourage you to try to make it over there to Memorial Stadium on Thursday night. That would be a great way to understand what's going on for the weekend and get a perspective on the history behind the University of Illinois program that we know so much today, but where it came from. And as great as all the players are that have come after Red Grange, he set the template for just about everybody in terms of an athlete post retirement. That it's shocking that he was on the cutting edge of radio, cutting edge of TV. And that is just an amazing thing that a University of Illinois athlete was one of the guys who really built the template for how athletes will behave in the future. And he started it in the 1920s. So thank you so much for coming on here. If you enjoyed this, of course, you can go to IlliniGuys.com. You can subscribe there. It's only 27 cents a day, and you can get a ton of insight on what's going on with University of Illinois athletics, both the things we see and the things behind the scenes that we talk about in our message boards. Please give us a try. You get 7 days for free, and we think you will enjoy it. And of course, you can listen to our radio show, the Illini Guys Sports Spectacular. It is our weekly 2-hour Illini centric radio show across the state of Illinois. You can also get it on podcast. And we really encourage you, if you enjoy Illini sports, if you do not want to hear somebody screaming and yelling at players and coaches, assuming that they're idiots, and if you do not want to hear politics, that is the show for you. We have fun, we talk Illini, and we laugh a lot. Please go ahead and tune that in. We also have a Big Ten show, again, once a week, 2 hours. You can get it on podcast. It's called Big Sports Radio. We have the same rules for that. We talk Big Ten. We laugh a lot. We have fun, and we don't talk any politics or anything like that. Just sports for you people who want to relax, have a good time, smile on your face. Tune that in as well. And of course, you have our IlliniGuys.com YouTube page that you can get the videos of what we're doing. There's a lot of people who enjoy the video format, and our stuff is there as well. We will be back, of course. We will talk a little bit later on about the Big Ten basketball seasons And of course, next week we will talk about the Purdue Boilermakers. Until then, go Illini.